Welcome to the program. I am your host, Andrew Wilkow. As we all know, and no shock to any of you, former President Donald Trump mopped the floor with Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley last night in Iowa, becoming the first GOP candidate to get over 50% of the vote ever. And much to our surprise, Trump was pretty gracious and humble about it. Take a look.
And to all of the people standing behind me and all of the people in this room and so many great politicians and great dignitaries and friends, I just want to thank you all. This is a very special night. And this is the first, because the big night is going to be in November when we take back our country, and truly we do make our country great again. Thank you very much, everybody. Great honor. Thank you very much.
Actually, he went on to say very nice things about all of the other candidates, and we'll get to it during the argument. Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump. I'll play you a clip of me saying that's exactly what was going to happen. All right, my first guest is an independent political analyst and author of the Great American Political Trivia Challenge, Rich Rubino. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, so this is the first time ever. Are there any other trivia points that we need to know about last night?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. From a trivia perspective, in 1988, this was the first time, this actually the second time Bob Dole ran in 1980, 96, and 1988. He won Iowa by 12.8 points. That had been the record for the largest win in a multi-candidate field. On the Democratic side, well, the record is technically Tom Harkin. He won 77.4%, but that doesn't count because Iowa was his home state and the other candidates essentially ceded it to him. But certainly Donald Trump has bragging rights. He can now say that I've gotten more than any other candidate in the Republican field. So I think that's probably the greatest from a trivia perspective. I will say, though, from the Democratic side, if I were Ron DeSantis, I would try to make this case. I would try to say, if he's trying to spin it somewhat, he would say that back in 1984, Walter Mondale won 49%. Gary Hart finished with about 17%. Like a week later, because of the momentum Gary Hart got by winning Iowa, he landed up winning New Hampshire. Not that this is actually going to happen, but I think from a spin perspective, you can say that I've fallen and now I'm in second place.
What about Rick Santorum and Ted Cruz? Obviously, they didn't go on to become president. How did they do in the Iowa caucus?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'd put Mike Huckabee in that category as well. There's a disproportionate influence of evangelical Christians in the Republican primary. It's about 60%. That's why Mike Huckabee won in 2008 the Iowa caucuses, but he was not able to win in New Hampshire. He was not able to win the nomination. In 2012, Mitt Romney was the establishment candidate. Rick Santorum landed up barely winning Iowa that year, even though the media called it for Mitt Romney. So Rick Santorum did not get some of the normal favorable media coverage and momentum that a candidate should get. In 2016, Ted Cruz won, Marco Rubio came in second, and Donald Trump came in third. And if I were Donald Trump, if I were advising him, I would also acerbate something to the effect of, I would say, we came in third in 2016. This year, we came in first place. But Iowa tends to be different sometimes in New Hampshire. And also, and I don't think this is necessarily true for President Donald Trump, Iowa tends to pick candidates that New Hampshire doesn't pick, that are generally not ratified by the voters, whether it's someone like on the Democratic side, someone like Dick Gephardt, or on the Republican side, George H.W. Bush in 1980, Bob Dole in 1988, Santorum, Huckabee, Ted Cruz. So they do tend to pick candidates who do not garner the nomination.
So does that mean that if you win, it's a nice metric, but Iowa isn't as all important as we'd like to believe it is?
Yes, and this is disparaging, and I'm not saying it's accurate, but John Sununu, the former governor of New Hampshire, used to say that Iowa picks corn, New Hampshire picks presidents, and there's some truth to that. New Hampshire, and actually South Carolina, more so than New Hampshire or Iowa, is a better predictor of who the nominee is eventually going to be. Usually it goes to Iowa, then it comes over to New Hampshire. Then sometimes if a candidate, like take, for example, Pat Buchanan back in 1996, after Pat Buchanan came very close in Iowa, then he actually won the New Hampshire primary. In South Carolina, the establishment came to the aid of the establishment candidate, Bob Dole, and Bob Dole ended up winning South Carolina, just like George W. Bush did in 2000 over John McCain. So South Carolina seems to be usually as the firewall to make sure that the establishment candidate or whoever is the front runner tends to win the nomination, despite what might happen in Iowa or in New Hampshire.
Does it mean anything that Trump's up 15 points on Haley in New Hampshire and 30 points in her home state?
There is a poll that's come out, and this probably is an outlier that shows that essentially an even right now between Haley and Donald Trump. I don't know if I would necessarily trust that, but I think that in terms of New Hampshire, obviously Haley needs to win a state, and this is tailor-made for her. There are a lot of independent, moderate-minded Republicans on the Democratic side. There's not going to be much of a battle because Joe Biden is not on the ballot, and Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson are not considered major candidates. So you'd think theoretically some independents might decide to go for become a Republican for the day and vote for Nikki Haley. So that benefits her just like it benefited John McCain back in 2000 when he defeated George W. Bush by about 17 points. But South Carolina is absolutely critical because if you can't win your home state, then it's very hard to go to benefactors and say, well, I'm going to win the rest of them. I'm going to win the nomination. They'll say you couldn't win their own state. The voters who knew you best. That's very hard. As I said earlier, Tom Harkin won the Iowa caucuses with 77.4% of the vote because he was from Iowa back in 1992. Now, contrary-wise, in 1992, Jerry Brown lost to Bill Clinton in California. His campaign was effectively over. Same thing with Marco Rubio in Florida in 2016 and Elizabeth Warren in 2020. You absolutely, positively need to win your home state.
Well, I'm going on 538. I'm not even looking at any sort of conservative polling here. I'm looking at pretty progressive polling, and I don't see Nikki Haley, pulling out a victory in New Hampshire. And it's 15 points in New Hampshire. It's 30 in South Carolina, according to 538. If she, like you said, if she doesn't win her own state, there's no path to victory. Rich, I got to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Well, Joe Biden is pulling out the big guns. Now he's got media and entertainment mogul Jeffrey Katzenberg as a co-chair, who doesn't seem to think it's undemocratic to just pull Trump from the ballot.
Jeffrey, you said that voters will decide the election. Does the campaign feel it's undemocratic for a presidential candidate to be kept off the ballot?
I don't know.
I'll take that. The Supreme Court's going to decide that. That's not something that's not a Democratic Party position. It's just that in various states, individuals have taken this issue up, and we're going to hear from the Supreme Court shortly, I'm sure.
Yeah, nothing says democracy like taking the opposition frontrunner off the ballot. My argument's next.